I'm here with Bita DeLisi of Stonegate Legal Services. And today we're asking Bita, what effect are the increasing interest rates going to have on your rental property? It's going to be great. Stay tuned. Bita, how are you?
Good, Terry. How are you?
Good. So very apropos topic these days with these fakakta interest rates going nuts. So from your perspective, what are your thoughts? What are some things that landlords should be keeping in mind as interest rates tend to creep up in regards to their tenants, the building, everything? What are your thoughts?
Well, firstly, Terry, when the interest rates start to creep up, I get an overwhelming number of calls regarding rent increases and what type of tenancies or properties can you raise the rent over over the guideline percentage. And often, the properties are not exempt from rent increase, which means that the landlords are limited as to how much they can increase the rent. And when they crunch those numbers, even by providing a rent increase notice per the guideline, it doesn't offset the landlord's expenses. Now, secondly, landlords should be treating their rental properties like a business. And just like any other business, one of the risks you do take on as a landlord is that if the interest rates creep up, that it's possible that you have to now dip into your pocket to pay off or offset some of those expenses. It has nothing to do with the tenancy. Thirdly, a lot of landlords are, approaching their tenants and they're telling their tenants, Mr. Tenant, either you pay more or I'm going to have to sell the property or have somebody move into this property. And they do this in writing, which I never understood. Why do you put these things in writing? Right? Because they will be used against you on the board.
Right.
And once the tenant takes that position, Terry, that I'm not going to pay more, why should I pay more to carry the property for the landlord? The landlord will serve them a notice, usually for somebody moving in or themselves moving in. And they try to use this notice as a loophole to end the tenancy. And once it gets to the board, 9 times out of 10, that matter gets dismissed because you can't just bully the tenant out because the interest rates have increased. And lastly, Terry, with the rise of the rent increases, some landlords genuinely cannot carry the property. They cannot dip into their pocket. And I'm not talking about the big landlord. I'm talking about the small landlord that has just one additional property in addition to their principal residence. And what happens then is they have no choice but to list the property for sale. When they list the property, that tenant can become uncooperative, meaning that they won't allow for showings. They're going to restrict showings. They won't move. The property can't close. And it creates a headache for the landlord.
Right.
When this happens, Terry, when a large group of landlords, they sell the property, even when the property is sold and the new purchaser requires possession, because of the backlog of the landlord and tenant board, it's going to take a while. And I'm talking about 7 to 8 months before the matter is heard at the board. And that's if the landlord makes no errors in that notice. Because if there are errors in that notice, guess what? That application will get dismissed.
And that's why we're using a paralegal, by the way, folks. But sorry, I interrupted you there, Bita.
Absolutely. No worries. That's why absolutely everybody should be using someone to help them with the process.
Right. So a few things to unpack there. One is I think, and this is really important for new landlords. Bita was saying, and I'm saying, this is a business, right? And it needs to be treated not only just in this matter, but in all matters as well. So that's a good piece. From a real estate perspective, I just want to touch on what you had said about the tenants becoming uncooperative. Now, I've got myself in a pickle. I need to sell this rental property. We are assuming it's month to month and not a lease, right? In this scenario here. And we come up to the tenants and say, look, sorry, here's what's going on. Unfortunately, we need to sell this property. They then turn around in some instances and say, well, we're not letting people in. What remedy does a landlord have in that? Because we're allowed to sell this, right? So what remedy does a landlord have with an obstinate tenant who just Nobody's coming in.
So if you have a tenant that's uncooperative and they're not allowing anyone to come in, a landlord must go through the board. So they must serve a notice for interference. Then they have to file that with the board. And just remember, just because the tenant is not allowing for showings doesn't expedite a landlord to get in front of the board quicker. The landlord must now wait 7 to 8 months for a notice of hearing, and then the board will decide what will happen with that notice.
Well, what are some things that can happen? Can you get rid of the tenant at the end of that period? Now you've had to pay your mortgage and you can't afford your mortgage, so I'm not sure, but maybe you're borrowing some money from mom and dad or something to kind of get you through. Can the tenant get evicted for that? Should the board decide?
That's a great question. I have never seen a tenant get evicted for not allowing for showings. What I have seen is the board issue an order for the tenants to comply. And if the tenant does not comply, then the landlord can apply to the board under Section 78 of the Act, which means a breach in a board order. And then hopefully the board will issue an order to evict the tenant.
Okay.
But I've yet to see that happen.
But even if that happened, that's months away. Now, listen, the last question I've got for you. That same scenario we've got, the market takes a turn. Okay, so witness February, March of 2022. It was like somebody shut up a light switch. So if we've got a situation where I'm trying to sell it in January of last year where the market's hot, I should get a price, the tenants being difficult, I can't get anybody in. We now go through February and March, and I'm selling for a lot less than I could have got in January. Is there any remedy to come after the tenant for, that cost me hundreds of thousands of dollars?
Unfortunately not. The tenancy has nothing to do with the landlord's intention to sell the property. So in cases like that, Terry, when there's a hot market and landlords ask me, what do I do? Cash for keys. You're almost better off throwing a bit of a bone to the tenant, paying them 10 or 15,000, and then making an additional $100,000 on the sale rather than, bringing the price down because the tenant is not cooperating.
Yeah, no, and you're right, but absolutely you're right. The challenge sometimes, I think that some people who are in those situations, and we're probably going to see a few more of them, is they tend not, as you pointed out, they tend not to be the sophisticated big players, right?
Yeah.
So it's not always something that is going through their mind. So again, if you're in a situation like that, call Bita. She's paralegal. This is what she does, right? And she can help navigate through some of those instances. Right, Bita?
Absolutely. That's what we're here for. We're here to help support you in your matter.
Perfect. Okay, everybody. Again, thank you for watching. If you have any questions for Bita, any questions for me, email, cell phone, all that good stuff is going to be in the description below. We'll talk to you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.